Hey guys, it's Jasper, and today I'm going to be reading a favorite fairy tale of mine from the collection by Hans Christian Andersen, Thumbelina. Pairing with our story Thumbelina today, I have chosen a fine cup of coffee because I'm so sleepy today and it needs the coffee. But because it's Thumbelina, I chose this cute little floral mug, and it's got like flowers all on the inside. It's so adorable, right?
It's so adorable, right?
So I will be drinking coffee. You have whatever you want. As always, pour yourself something yummy to drink, relax, and enjoy. Cheers.
Thumbelina is a tiny person. Thumbelina is so small.
Thumbelina by Hans Christian Andersen, written in 1835. There once was a woman who wanted so very much to have a tiny little child, but she did not know where to find one. So she went to an old witch and she said, "I have set my heart upon having a tiny little child. Please, could you tell me where I can find one?"
Why, that's easily done, said the witch. Here's a grain of barley for you. But it isn't at all the sort of barley that farmers grow in their fields or that the chickens get to eat. Put it in a flower pot, and you'll see what you shall see.
"Oh, thank you," the woman said. She gave the witch 12 pennies and planted the barley seed as soon as she got home. It quickly grew into a fine, large flower, which looked very much like a tulip. But the petals were folded tight, as though it were still a bud. "This is such a pretty flower," said the woman. She kissed its lovely red and yellow petals, and just as she kissed it, the flower gave a loud pop and flew open. It was a tulip, right enough, but on the green cushion in the middle of it sat a tiny girl. She was dainty and fair to see, but she was no smaller than your thumb, and so she was called Thumbelina. A nicely polished walnut shell served as her cradle. Her mattress was made of the blue petals of violets, and a rose petal was pulled up to cover her. That was how she slept at night. In the daytime, she played on a table where the woman put a plate surrounded with a wreath of flowers. Their stems lay in the water, on which there floated a large tulip petal. Thumbelina used the petal as a boat, and with a pair of white horsehairs for oars, she could row clear across the plate, a charming sight. She could sing, too. Her voice was the softest and sweetest that anyone had ever heard. One night, as she lay in her cradle, a horrible toad hopped in through the window. One of the panes was broken. This big, ugly, slimy toad jumped right down on the table where Thumbelina was asleep under the red rose petal.
"Here's a perfect wife for my son,"
the toad exclaimed. She seized upon the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep and hopped off with it out the window and into the garden. A big, broad stream ran through it with a muddy marsh along its banks, and here the toad lived with her son. Ugh, he was just like his mother, slimy and horrible.
"Quacks, quacks,
Was all he could say when he saw the graceful little girl on the walnut shell.
Don't speak so loud or you'll wake her up," the old toad told him. "She might get away from us yet, for she is light as a puff of snow swan's down. We must put her on one of the broad water lily leaves out in the stream. She is so small and light that it will be just like an island to her. She can't run away from us while we are making our best room under the mud ready for you two to live in."
Many water lilies with broad green leaves grew in the stream, and it looked as if they were floating on the surface. The leaf that lay furthest from the bank was the largest of them all. And it was to this leaf the old toad swam with the walnut shell that held Thumbelina. The poor thing woke up early the next morning, and when she saw where she was, she began to cry bitterly. There was water all around the big green leaf, and there was no way at all for her to reach the shore. The old toad sat in the mud, decorating a room with green rushes and yellow water lilies to have it looking best for her new daughter-in-law. Then she and her ugly son swam out to the leaf on which Thumbelina was standing. They came for her pretty little bed, which they wanted to carry to the bridal chamber before they took her there. The old toad curtsied deeply in the water before her and said, "Meet my son. He is to be your husband, and you will share a delightful home in the mud." "Coaxa, coaxa, breaky, breaky, breaky," was all the son could say. Then they took the pretty little bed and swam away with it. Left all alone on the green leaf, Thumbelina sat down and cried. She did not want to live in the slimy toad's house. She did not want to have the toad's horrible son for her husband. The little fishes who swam in the water beneath her had seen the toad and heard what she had said. So up popped their heads to have a look at the little girl. No sooner had they seen her than they felt very sorry that anyone so pretty should have to go down to live with that hideous toad. No, that should never be. They gathered around the green stem that held the leaf where she was and gnawed it into two with their teeth. Away went the leaf down the stream, and away went Thumbelina, far away where the toad could not catch her. Thumbelina sailed past many a place, and when the little birds in the bushes saw her, they sang, "What a darling little girl." The leaf drifted further and further away with her, and so it was that Thumbelina became a traveler. A lovely white butterfly kept fluttering around her, and at last alighted on the leaf because he admired Thumbelina. She was a happy little girl again, now that the toad could not catch her. It was all very lovely as she floated along, and where the sun struck the water, it looked like shining gold. Thumbelina undid her sash, tied one end of it to the butterfly, and made the other end fast to the leaf. It went much faster now, and Thumbelina went much faster too, for of course she was standing on it. Just then a big Maybug flew by and caught sight of her. Immediately he fastened his claws around her slender waist and flew her up into a tree. Away went the green leaf down the stream, and away the butterfly with it, for he was tied to the leaf and could not get loose. My goodness, how frightened little Thumbelina was when the Maybug carried her up in the tree. But she was even more sorry for the nice white butterfly she had fastened to the leaf, because he couldn't free himself. He would have to starve to death. But the Maybug wasn't one to care about that. He sat her down on the largest green leaf of the tree, fed her honey from the flowers, and told her how pretty she was, considering that she didn't look in the least like a Maybug. After a while, all the other Maybugs who lived in the tree came to pay them a call. As they stared at Thumbelina, the lady Maybugs threw up their feelers and said, "Why, she has only 2 legs! What a miserable sight!" "She hasn't any feelers," one cried.
"She is pinched in the waist. How shameful! She looks like a human being. How ugly she is!"
said all the female Maybugs. Yet Thumbelina was as pretty as ever. Even the Maybug who had flown away with her knew that, but every last one of them kept calling her ugly. He at length came to agree with them and would have nothing to do with her. She could go wherever she chose. They flew down out of the tree and with her left her on a daisy where she sat and cried because she was so ugly that the Maybugs wouldn't have anything to do with her. Nevertheless, she was the loveliest little girl you could imagine, and as frail and fine as the petal of a rose. All summer long, poor Thumbelina lived alone in the woods. She wove herself a hammock of grass and hung it under a big burdock leaf to keep off the rain. She took honey from the flowers for food, and drank the dew and found on the leaves every morning. In this way, the summer and fall went by. Then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly for her flew away. The trees and the flowers withered. The big burdock leaf under which she had lived shriveled up until nothing was left of it but dry yellow stalk. She was terribly cold, for her clothes had worn threadbare, and she herself was so slender and frail. Poor Thumbelina. She would freeze to death. Snow began to fall, and every time a snowflake struck her, it was as if she had been hit by a whole shovelful. For we are quite tall, while she measured only an inch. She wrapped a withered leaf about her, but there was no warmth in it. She shivered with cold. Near the edge of the woods where she had now arrived was a large grain field, but the grain had been harvested long ago. Only the dry, bare stubble stuck out of the frozen ground. It was just as if she were lost in a vast forest. And oh, how she shivered with cold. Then she came to the door of a field mouse, who had a little hole amid the stubble. There this mouse lived, warm and cozy, with a whole storeroom of grain, and a magnificent kitchen and pantry. Poor Thumbelina stood at the door just like a beggar child, and pled for a little bit of barley, because she hadn't anything to eat for 2 days past.
"Why, you poor little thing," said the field mouse, who turned out to be a kind-hearted old creature. "You must come into my warm room and share my dinner." She took such a fancy to Thumbelina that she said, "If you care to, you may stay with me all winter, but you must keep my room tidy and tell me stories, for I'm very fond of them."
Thumbelina did as the kind old field mouse asked, and she had a very good time of it.
"Soon we shall have a visitor," the field mouse said. "Once every week my neighbor comes to see me, and he is even better off than I am. His rooms are large, and he wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only get him for a husband, you'd be well taken care of. But he can't see anything. You must tell him the very best stories, you know."
Thumbelina did not like this suggestion. She would not even consider the neighbor because he was a mole. He paid them a visit in his black velvet coat. The field mouse talked about how wealthy and wise he was, and how his home was more than 20 times larger than hers. But for all his knowledge, he cared nothing for the sun and flowers. He had nothing good to say for them. He never laid his eyes on them. As Thumbelina had to sing for him, she sang, "Maybug, Maybug, fly away home," and "The monk goes afield." The mole fell in love with her sweet voice, but he didn't say anything about it yet, for he was a most discreet fellow. He had just dug a long tunnel through the ground from his house to theirs, and the field mouse and Thumbelina were invited to use it whenever they pleased, though he warned them not to be alarmed by the dead bird that lay in this passage. It was a complete bird with feather and beak. It must have died quite recently when winter set in, and it was buried right in the middle of the tunnel. The mole took in his mouth a torch of decayed wood. In the darkness it glimmered like fire. He went ahead of them to light the way through the long, dark passage. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole put his broad nose to the ceiling and made a large hole through which daylight could fall. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, with his lovely wings folded at his sides and his head tucked under his feathers. The poor bird certainly must have died of the cold. Thumbelina felt so sorry for him. She loved all the little birds who had sung and sweetly twittered to her all through the summer, but the mole gave the body a kick with his short stumps and said, "Now he won't be chirping any more. What a wretched thing it is to be born a little bird. Thank goodness none of my children can become birds, who has nothing but his chirp chirp and must starve to death when winter comes along." "Yes, you are so right. You are a sensible man," the field mouse agreed. "What good is all his chirping to a bird in the winter time, when he starves and freezes? But that's considered very grand, I imagine." Thumbelina kept silent, but when the others turned their back on the bird, she bent over, smoothed aside the feathers that hid the bird's head, and kissed his closed eyes. "Maybe it was he who sang so sweetly to me in the summertime," she thought to himself. "What pleasure he gave me, the dear, pretty bird." The mole closed up the hole and let in the daylight, and he took the ladies home. That night Thumbelina could not sleep a wink, so she got up and wove a fine large coverlet out of hay. She took it to the dead bird and spread it over him so that he would lie warm in the cold earth. She tucked him in with some soft thistle down and she had found in the field mouse's room. Goodbye, you pretty little bird, she said. Goodbye, and thank you for your sweet songs last summer, when the trees were all green and the sun shone so warmly upon us. She laid her head on his breast, and it startled her to feel a soft thump, as if something were beating inside. This was the bird's heart. He was not dead. He was only numb with cold, and now that he had been warmed, he came to life again. In the fall, all swallows fly off to warm countries, but if one of them starts too late, he gets so cold he drops down, as if he were dead, and lies where he fell. And then the cold snow covers him. Thumbelina was so frightened she trembled, for the bird was so big, so enormous compared to her own inch of height. But she mustered her courage, tucked the cotton wool down closer around the poor bird, brought the mint leaf that covered her own bed, and spread it over the bird's head. The following night she tiptoed out to him again. He was alive now, but so weak. He could barely open his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood beside him with a piece of touchwood that was her only lantern.
Thank you, pretty little child, the sick swallow said. I have been wonderfully warmed. Soon I shall get strong once more and be able to fly again in the warm sunshine.
Oh, she said, it's cold outside. It's snowing and freezing. You just stay in your warm bed and I'll nurse you. Then she brought him some water and the petal of a flower. The swallow drank and told her how he'd been hurt one of his wings in a thorn bush, and for that reason couldn't fly as fast as the other swallows when they flew far, far away to the warm countries. Finally, he had dropped to the ground. That was all he remembered, and he had no idea how he came to be where she found him. The swallow stayed there all through the winter, and Thumbelina was kind to him, and tended him with loving care. She didn't say anything about this to the field mouse or to the mole because they did not like the poor, unfortunate swallow. As soon as spring came and the sun warmed the earth, the swallow told Thumbelina it was time to say goodbye. She reopened the hole that the mole had made in the ceiling, and the sun shone in splendor upon them. The swallow asked Thumbelina to go with him. She could sit on his back as they flew away through the green woods, but Thumbelina knew it would make her old field mouse friend feel badly if she left like that. So she said, "No, I cannot go."
Farewell, farewell, my good and pretty girl," said the swallow as he flew into the sunshine.
Tears came into Thumbelina's eyes as she watched him go, for she was so fond of the poor swallow. Chirp, chirp, sang the bird as he flew into the green woods. Thumbelina felt very downcast. She was not permitted to go out in the warm sunshine. Moreover, the grain that was sown in the field above the field mouse's house grew so tall that to poor little Thumbelina, who was only an inch high, it was like a dense forest.
"You must work on your trousseau this summer," the field mouse said, for their neighbor the loathsome mole in his black velvet coat had proposed to her. "You must have both woolens and linens, both bedding and wardrobe when you become the mole's wife."
Thumbelina had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders to spin and weave for her day and night. The mole came to call every evening, and his favorite remark was that the sun, which now baked the earth as hard as a rock, would not nearly be so hot when summer was over. Yes, as soon as summer was past, he would be marrying Thumbelina. But she was not at all happy about it, because she didn't like that tedious mole the least bit. Every morning at sunrise, every evening at sunset, she would steal out the door. When the breeze blew the ears of grain apart, she could catch glimpses of the blue sky. She could dream about how bright and fair it was out of doors, and how she wished she would see her dear swallow again. But he did not come back, for doubtless he was far away, flying about in the lovely green woods. When fall arrived, Thumbelina's whole trousseau was ready.
"Your wedding day is 4 weeks off," the field mouse told her.
But Thumbelina cried and declared she would not have a tedious mole for a husband.
"Fiddlesticks," said the field mouse. "Don't you be obstinate, or I'll bite you with my white teeth. Why, you're getting a superb husband. The queen herself hasn't a black velvet coat as fine as his. Both his kitchen and his cellar are well supplied. You ought to thank goodness you're getting him." Then came the wedding day. The mole had come to take Thumbelina home with him.
where she would have to live deep underground and never go out in the warm sunshine again because he disliked it so. The poor little girl felt very sad that she had to say goodbye to the glorious sun, which the field mouse had at least let her look at, out through the doorway. "Farewell, bright sun," she said. With her arm stretched toward it, she walked a little way from the field mouse's home. The grain had been harvested and only the dry stubble was left in the field. "Farewell! Farewell!" she cried again, and flung her little arms around a small red flower that was still in bloom. "If you see my dear swallow, please give him my love." Chirp, 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 chirp. She suddenly heard a twittering over her head. She looked up and there was a swallow just passing by. He was so glad to see Thumbelina, although when she told him how she hated to marry the mole and live deep underground where the sun never shone, she could not hold back her tears. "Now that cold winter is coming," the swallow told her, "I shall fly far, far away to the warm countries. Won't you come along with me? You can ride on my back. Just tie yourself on with your sash, and away we'll fly, far from the ugly mole, from his dark hole, far, far away from the mountains to the warm countries where sun shines so much fairer than here, to where it's always summer and there are always flowers. Please fly away with me, dear little Thumbelina. You, who saved my life when I lay frozen in a dark hole in the earth." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina. She sat on his back, put her feet on his outstretched wings, and fastened her sash to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow soared into the air over forests and over lakes, high up over the great mountains that are always capped with snow. When Thumbelina felt cold in the chill air, she crept under the bird's warm feathers, and only her little head stuck out to watch all the wonderful sights below. At length they came to the warm countries. There the sun shone far more brightly than it ever does here, and the sky seemed twice as high. Along the ditches and hedgerows grew marvelous green and blue grapes. Lemons and oranges hung in the woods. The air smelled sweetly of myrtle and thyme. By the wayside the loveliest children ran hither and thither, playing with brightly colored butterflies. But the swallow flew on still farther, and it became more and more beautiful. Under magnificent green trees, on the shore of Blue Lake, there stood an ancient palace of dazzling white marble. The lofty pillars were wreathed with vines, and at the top of them many swallows had made their nests. One nest belonged to the swallow who carried Thumbelina. "This is my home," the swallow told her. "If you will choose one of these glorious flowers in bloom down below, I shall place you in it, and you will have all your heart desires." "That'll be lovely," she cried and clapped her tiny hands. A great white marble pillar had fallen to the ground, where it lay in 3 broken pieces. Between these pieces grew the loveliest large white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and put her on one of the large petals. How surprised she was to find in the center of the flower a little man, as shining and transparent as if he had been made out of glass. On his head was the daintiest of little gold crowns. On his shoulders were the brightest shining wings, and he was not a bit bigger than Thumbelina. He was the spirit of the flower. In every flower there lived a small man or woman just like him, but he was the king over all of them. "Oh, isn't he handsome?" Thumbelina said softly to the swallow. The king was somewhat afraid of the swallow, which seemed a very giant bird to anyone as small as he. But when he saw Thumbelina, he rejoiced, for she was the prettiest little girl he had ever laid eyes on. So he took off his golden crown and put it on her head. He asked her if he might know her name. He asked her to be his wife, which would make her queen over all the flowers. Here, indeed, was a different sort of husband, from the toad's son and the mole with his black velvet coat. So she said yes to the charming king. From all the flowers trooped little ladies and gentlemen, delightful to behold. Every one of them brought Thumbelina a present, but the best gift of all was a pair of wings that had belonged to a large silver fly. When these were made to fast to her back, she too could flit from flower to flower. Everyone rejoiced as the swallow perched above them in his nest and sang his very best songs for them. He was sad, though, deep down in his heart, for he liked Thumbelina so much he wanted never to part with her. You shall no longer be called Thumbelina, the flower spirit told her. That name is too ugly for anyone as pretty as you. We shall call you Maya. Goodbye, goodbye, said the swallow. He flew away again from the warm countries back to faraway Denmark, where he had a little nest over the window of the man who can tell you fairy tales. To him, the birds sang, chirp, 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 and that's how he heard the whole story. First order of business. It's a long story. I don't know if I've ever read this story out loud. I think I've only ever read it to myself, and reading it out loud, I was like, man, this is a long story. But it's a full story as well. Like it's not lacking for anything. It really covers quite a lot of territory. There's so much we could talk about in this story, and I am only going to touch on a few points because this was a long reading, but also because I would love to hear what you thought of the story. And yeah, so comment down below and let's talk about this tale. One of the things that really stands out to me about this story, and something that I always loved about the tale of Thumbelina, is that Thumbelina has things happen to her. But despite the things that happen to her, she not only just like makes the best of her situation, but she's kind of, she's got quite a bit of creativity. And her creativity and her kindness are two things which get her pretty far. And it is her bravery and courage that is sort of the thing that she's been really needing to work on and build up, and that's what finally gets her free. And I love that. The first example of this is when she's put on the lily pad by the toads. And at first she does what probably anyone would do when they realize they've like been placed in a really awful situation, is she cries a little. And when she cries, the fish of course come and they chew away at the stem, and so she's set adrift and she's kind of on a boat now. But then after that, what happens is something changes in her attitude and her sort of creativity kicks in. And so she sees like a butterfly going along, and she attaches the butterfly to like a sash and kind of makes a sail out of the butterfly. And so now she's going faster. And as Hans Christian Andersen puts it, she becomes a traveler. Thumbelina was now a traveler, which is great because she goes from being, Thumbelina was kidnapped, like Thumbelina's as a victim, but she is able to take that situation and gets along on the lily pad, and then she's like, I'm not a victim, I'm a traveler. And she starts seeing all these wonderful things. And so I love that in the story, that this really awful thing happens to her. She's put out in the woods and she's far from her home, but what she's left with when she's able to escape those people, even though she's still away from her home, she still like doesn't know where she is, she's like, it's okay because now I'm a traveler and I'm seeing all this stuff I never would have got to see. So she has such a great perspective and point of view. Then the second thing is when she's captured by the mayfly, I think it is, the little bug that comes and picks her up and is all like, you gotta be my sweetheart, and she's like, no, I don't like you. And then, you know, when all his friends come along and they're like, she's so ugly, he drops her off on a rose, I think, or a daisy or something, and so she's really sad. But this lasts for a while, and so she's sad about this, but then she has the summer where she's living alone in the woods, and the narrator just kind of brushes over this. But again, she's not like, oh no, how am I going to get home? Goodness gracious, how am I going to get over, you know, being called ugly? She kind of just moves on, and she lives in the woods, and she invents different things for herself, with weaving the leaves together and all this kind of stuff. And so she takes what's happened and she moves on from it. And I think that's really, really kind of neat. The other thing, of course, we see is when she's brought in with the mouse, which I think is a really interesting part, because the mouse is sort of the third villain, but at the same time, she is meaning well. You know, because initially she lets her come in and she's like, you're come in for the winter, but you're gonna take care of the house and tell me stories. And that's kind of like a fair deal because she's gonna take care of her for the winter. course, later this turns into her setting her up with the mole and being like, you gots to marry the mole. He's got money. He's got cash. He's got stuff. Like, he's the best of the best. He might be blind. He might live underground where you hate it, but, like, not even the queen has got a black velvet coat like he does. So, marriage, right? But one of the things that stands Thumbelina apart is that she has such sympathy for, one, the bird that they come across, where the mouse and the mole are just like, who needs them? I mean, a good reason being that birds would be a predator, I suppose. But she has great sympathy for the bird, and even when the bird, I mean, because I'm thinking about this now, so the bird probably is a predator of the mouse and the mole, but when the bird starts to stir, Thumbelina's afraid for a moment because the bird is so huge, and she's like, uh-oh, like, I might have felt sorry for the bird and maybe it was right to take care of him, but doesn't mean he's not going to eat me when he wakes up. And so she, is really brave in that moment where she stays with him and then, is able to befriend this bird. But this is something that's a really big part of Thumbelina's character, is that she appreciates the world around her. And this is another thing that the mole and the mouse don't understand, is that Thumbelina loves the sun and the flowers, these things that are just generally like good, where they hate them. They have no use for them. And it makes me think about the simple things in life that we can find value in, but we can also very easily just be pessimistic about and, quickly lose value for these things, and that's a shame. One of the things that she really has to work on in the story, and this is her growing point, and everyone has to have the growing point, and it's one that I resonate with, is her ability to stand up for herself and to be courageous. And she has moments of courage, like when she's on the lily pad and she decides, I'm not far from home, I'm not lost, I'm a traveler now. And when she lives in the summer by herself, lives in the woods in the summer by herself, this is a courageous thing she does. When she takes care of the bird who could very easily eat her, this is a courageous thing she does. But the last very courageous thing she has to do, and I think it's something we struggle with, is she has to put her needs ahead of other people's wants for her or perception or desire. Right? Because initially when the bird says, fly away with me, Thumbelina is like, I can't, because the field mouse would be upset if I did. And I think Thumbelina knows she needs to leave. She can't live like this, but for the sake of the mouse and pleasing the mouse, she stays. And when the mouse, continues this whole thing with the mole and marry the mole, and you're gonna have to live underground and never see the sun, and it's so sad. She just wants to see the sun and be outside. She realizes at the end when the bird comes for her, Thumbelina realizes that she needs to leave. And there's that sad, very tender moment when the mouse lets her go outside one more time, and Thumbelina goes outside to say goodbye to her friend, the sun. And she's so overcome with what she is sacrificing for the sake of other people, for what she doesn't want at all, but for the sake of sort of others she's going to go with. And so she goes to say goodbye to the sun, and she sees this small red flower, and she gives it a hug and is like, if you see my friend the bird, send him my love. And it's very sweet, but it's very sad, because she shouldn't be doing this. She needs to have courage to stand up for what it is she knows she needs, rather than accommodating what it is other people want of her. And then the bird comes back, her swallow comes back and says, get up on my back and let's fly away. And it's such a great moment where we fly up, and she gets on the back and fly up, and we go over the mountains and over the water and over this palace, and things look so beautiful, and then things get more and more beautiful and more and more beautiful and more and more beautiful. And what it illustrates is such an amazing story of what life can look like if we follow what it is we need to do, rather than worrying about what it is other people think we need to do. Now, that doesn't mean we forfeit love or kindness, because certainly Thumbelina shows this. She shows love and kindness, but she also shows that there's a line, and there's a point where you have to say, I can help you up to here, but I have to do this for myself, because there are things we have to do for ourselves, and it's all right. Now, in the very end, a very quick little thing on the prince she meets, the king of the flowers, which is a sweet little part. What I like about this character, because obviously, you know, it sort of follows the happy ending that Thumbelina finds somebody and she get married, and now she's a queen, and it's very exciting. It is still sort of different than your general tropes in the way that this is the first time we're meeting him. He isn't the one who saves her. The one who saves her is, one, herself, because she has to decide to do this. She has to decide to stand up for herself. And two, the swallow, who is her friend. And I think it's really valuable that it isn't the prince, it isn't the one that she marries in the end, but it is firstly herself, and secondly a friend who plays a valuable role in changing her life and saving her from her circumstance. And so I don't mind that she, you know, flies to this this flower land and then marries the king of the flowers, because one, I mean, it doesn't follow the trope that he is the one who saves her. Not that there is necessarily anything wrong with that, but there is something wrong with when it is always that, right? But also because of the things we see from him. So when he sees her and he's like, man, she's so pretty, and Thumbelina is like, I will marry you. He doesn't have a crown formed for her. He takes his crown off his head and gives it to her. And I think that shows a great, tremendous, this is a display of true love, of giving love. That he isn't going to, you know, like the mole, tell her what to do and what not to do, or like the toad, not be able to speak. I guess that was a big downfall, or make her live in the mud. But he gives the crown from his head to her, and she isn't a princess, she is queen of the flowers now with this title. So I like the ending. I think that it's sweet, and yeah, Thumbelina is a favorite heroine of mine because she is kindness and courage, which is, now that I'm saying it out loud, this is what I loved about the 2015 adaptation, live action adaptation of Cinderella, Have Courage and Be Kind, because it pairs two things that the world desperately needs. Sometimes we get so caught up on just being strong and fierce, we forget to be kind. And we certainly need to be kind in a world that's so hard, and it takes a lot of courage to be kind. So anyways, I love this story. I hope you guys enjoyed the reading. I'd love to talk more about Thumbelina. If you'd like to hear more about Thumbelina or about the Don Bluth adaptation, Thumbelina, which I also really love, comment down below and let me know. As always, guys, I hope whatever you've been drinking has been good, and that the story has been a fair match. Cheers.